Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Rouxbe live event. My name is Chef Ken Rubin, and we have open office hours today. And this is an opportunity for all of you who have questions about cooking and cooking technique, products, ingredients, the process of cooking, to bring your questions to us for this exchange. It's an opportunity to ask your question by typing it in that right box you see there. It's a just a quick place to add some text. When you click the add button, it goes into a moderation queue. That allows us to have a quick look at it before we post it there, just right underneath where you type in your question. So you can see some questions already coming in. If you see a question that you like, go ahead and click on the little heart next to it. That will just bump up the order so I get to that question just a little bit sooner. Oh, looks like the heart is broken. Actually, my producer's telling me it's just a little rectangle now. It looks like that icon might be broken on some browsers. So anyhow, you can still click on that. We'll go ahead and just jump into some of our questions now. First question here from Omana, hope I'm saying that properly, asking, what is the easiest way to peel ginger without losing too much of its flesh? Yeah, really, really great question. This is something that, I actually, for many, many years, even as a working chef, would always take a vegetable peeler or even just a paring knife and kind of peel, ginger that way. And, one time I was on a trip in Mexico. This must have been the late 1990s. And I was at a smoothie station, and there was a person working there using just a little tiny, flimsy, white plastic disposable spoon, and using it with great, kind of purpose to get that ginger peeled. And it was amazing. So ever since then, I've always just used a spoon, even just a plastic spoon, to peel ginger. You almost just kind of scrape it across. And it's amazing to see how actually delicate that skin is, how you really don't need much force at all. You certainly don't need a knife or like a proper vegetable peeler. So I would just give that a shot. Kind of scrape with a spoon, see where that takes you. Part of why I like the small plastic spoon is it really allows you to get into some of those smaller little, kind of creases or kind of, little branches or arms of the ginger root that a knife or a peeler just might not get into. So hopefully that helps you. Next question here from Pam. What is your opinion on clean protein powders made with pea protein? Also, powdered greens are popular now. I'm completely open to people using plant-based protein supplements. In particular, things like pea protein or hemp protein, where it's very much just a whole food product that's pulverized or ground down into a powder or a flour type product that is then easily incorporated into smoothies or drinks or even other food. You can use pea protein powder for increasing protein in a baked good or a muffin or a pancake or other things like that as well. So I'm completely open to it. I think if that's something that you're interested in, if it if the texture and the flavor is all pleasing to you, that's great as well. In terms of the powdered greens, absolutely. You're also seeing just a lot of dehydrated vegetables. It used to be back in the day, it was like blue-green algae and smoothie mixes with like spirulina and things like this. Now, sky's the limit. It's powdered kale, it's powdered spinach, it's dehydrated vegetables of all kinds. People adding that to a smoothie, people can get just a lot of benefit, a lot of micronutrients in kind of a small package. So as much as I'm all for, using the carrot or using the whole kale leaf, certainly if you want to use a high quality powdered version of that product to kind of boost a drink or add to an ingredient, mix on a different recipe, that's great. Next question here from Katya. What is your go-to recipe to have broth for soup or other dishes on a regular basis? For anyone who's attended these office hours before, from hearing me speak about kind of my kind of routine, my regular process where I have vegetable stocks, usually a few different kinds of vegetable stocks or broths that I'm making. For me, it's really just all about flavor development and building flavor. So I'll have kind of my standard veggie stock, which is onions and leeks, carrots and celery, sometimes a little bit of parsnip, and then aromatics, some thyme, a little bit of bay leaf. I'm a big fan of parsley stems. I think it adds a lot of brightness to a veggie stock. I'll also make other kinds of stocks that might be more mushroom heavy or roasted tomato or roasted pepper heavy, just to create a little bit of a different flavor profile. But in terms of using that veggie stock, my go-to meals, like one of the things I always kind of share and talk about with Ruby students in terms of what do I eat a lot of, what is my kind of standard lunch, that kind of a thing. I eat just a lot of lentils. That's one of the things I find fills me up, makes me feel good. Great source of protein and fiber. I love the way they taste. And for me, I like lentils because they're faster cooking than other sorts of legumes. And I find it really easy to vary them, to make, just to kind of switch it up so I can have different flavors and different things going on with them. So just as an example, yesterday I made actually a soup with a combination of red lentils and then some additional yellow split peas, just for some additional texture and flavor. And I kind of bulked it out with a ton of vegetables. So I had some spinach, and I had some cauliflower and some of the greens from the cauliflower plant, which are really, really delicious, just chopped up. And I made just a really hearty, delicious soup with that. But the basis of that soup and the flavor really, came first and foremost from that veggie broth that I made, which just had beautiful aromatics. Again, I like to use onions and leek and lots and lots of vegetables to make that broth very rich. You're not going to get flavor unless you really commit to putting in plenty of veggies and not just using kind of odds and ends and scraps and things. Next question here from Christine. She's asking, is there a type of chef's knives that better for small hands? Great question. I always, when I speak to people about knives, I always tell people that, you might see a knife at the store, you might see a knife, online or something like that, and you don't really know a lot about it until you pick it up and you have it in your hand and you feel, the grip and the size of your hand on the grip, but also the balance of the knife, kind of the weight and the heft of the knife and the way it kind of feels in your hand when you're lifting it up, off the cutting board or doing some sort of a rocking motion if you're cutting. So part of it is just a tactile nature of buying a knife, that it really does help to be in person, to be able to hold that knife. If it's a friend, you can test the knife and kind of see if you like it. In terms of, knives for smaller hands, one just overall kind of guiding principle would be, don't go for those larger chef knives. So, err on the side of a smaller style knife, like a 6 or 7 inch blade, whether it's a Santoku style, which is really great for vegetable work, or if it's a, more of a classic style chef knife style knife that has more that tip, that point. Maybe overall a shorter style blade is going to have just a somewhat shorter handle that goes with it. You might find that certain manufacturers also, just by handle style, might have some handles that just feel better in your hand. So sometimes not about the size or the, whatever it might be, but it's the shape and the style, the weight, how it also, kind of handles when you're actually cutting. For myself, I tend to like more and more knives that are kind of lighter weight knives, and they tend to have a thinner spine, less heft overall than some of those larger chef knives I used to work with a lot, like a Wusthof Classic or something like that. But really, those knives also oftentimes have a little bit of a smaller handle as well. So hopefully that helps you. Nancy has a question. Can you please give us a peek into behind the scenes, how recipes are developed, narrated, and taped? So really good question, Nancy. A lot of the videos that you see on the Rouxbe site are actually, kind of coming through our content team. The hands and the voice and the vast majority of the videos are from Dawn Thomas, who's our co-founder. And she's also the person behind, many of the recipes on the site as well. So in terms of the creative inspiration, oftentimes we'll look to Dawn, and she becomes part of the overarching force of getting those recipes developed and actually kind of making that visual happen with the photograph also. So, our process is also very much focused on really understanding what is needed out there in the market. When 5-6 years ago, when the company really decided to start doing a lot more work in the plant-based space, we took a pretty hard look at content and what we had to build, and began to develop new courses and new assets, different materials for students that really kind of spoke to the need, to the depth and breadth of what was needed in the plant-based space. So that's kind of how we work with content. We're also very open to collaborating with content partners, so individuals or organizations who are top of class for what they do. We're always open to finding interesting partnerships to help promote and using our system to help power other instructional opportunities for people. So pretty fun for us. Next question here from Laura. Hi, Ken. I've learned that when you finish honing a chef knife, some steel residue might be left behind. So you might want to clean your knife on a cloth. When honing my chef knife, I've never seen those residues. Am I doing something wrong? Laura, so it really is dependent. Part of it is, when you're sharpening a knife on a stone or through other like mechanical sharpening methods, you're going to certainly see, because you're actually kind of grinding down some of that metal, you're going to certainly see, that those small little tiny pieces of metal, that like residue that you see. When you're honing a knife, it really depends on the nature of the knife and the sharpness of it, and kind of how much honing you need to do. Also the hardness of the steel. If it's a softer steel, you're going to have the possibility of more very, very small amounts of metal dust, essentially small fragments of metal coming off that blade. Sometimes really almost as an aftermath from the sharpening process. When you sharpen and you hone, you're essentially moving the metal, and you're creating this bent edge, and you're removing anything that would be kind of a bent over burr or any sort of a part of the metal that's not really kind of lined up. So sometimes when you're doing the steps, the honing process can have some additional metal that are residues. Excuse me. So the thing around cleaning is you want to clean it like no matter what. So if you're sharpening a knife, you've got a lot of that like metal matter. It'll be obvious. It'll actually like stick to a magnet if you hold it off. Honing, again, it just really depends. I would clean the knife after honing, because you don't really know how much metal is there or not. You might not even see it, but if you do take a damp cloth and clean it, you might just see a very, very small amount. Again, it's not something you want to ingest even in like tiny amounts. So that's why you want to clean it. You want to use water, a clean cloth, to kind of just take care of that extra step. I have seen, kind of things in kitchens where the knife was pretty jagged, And with the sharpening process, you actually do see like a lot of metal come off that knife. So you just want to make sure you're not ever eating that. Next question here from Perry. Hi, Ken. I'm sure you have heard this question before, but what blender do you folks recommend for plant-based cooking? We don't usually recommend like specific brands, but we always share what we use personally and like why we like it. So I think within the world of plant-based cooking, you do want to have a high-speed blender, and there's a few different brands that make high-speed blenders. I personally have a Vitamix, and I've used a Vitamix for many, many years, and have always felt great about it. I've also, in professional context, used Blendtex and other brand mixers and blenders that also work great. But in terms of what I use, I have a Vitamix. It's not a super fancy model. It's an old model. It's about 15 or 17 years old now. It works great still. I know some of the newer models have different speed settings and different kind of shaped vessels and things like this. But really the most important thing is just to have a good blender, because in many of these plant-based applications, if you're turning a bunch of cashews into a cashew cream, or you're trying to puree something to be very, very smooth and silky, you're just going to have much better results and better outcomes with that high-speed blender. Next question here is from Dorothy. Can one use their own kitchen to create foods for people, and what sort of insurance, if any, would one need for using your own kitchen? Who would I contact to inspect it, and how often does this need to happen? So Dorothy, it's a great question around home or like domestic food businesses. Every state, every county, even I would say, probably has some rules. I know in Oregon, where I live, there are a whole set of specific rules that govern domestic kitchens for business. They're different depending on what you also prepare. So bakery, I think bakery and confection is one category, and then hot foods is another. But they also have certain types of foods that are excluded, that you can't do in a home environment, that you want to have a commercial kitchen for. There are inspection measures in most cases, but again, it really depends. I would start with your state and inquire about that. Once you kind of determine, hey, can I do this in my own home or not? You can follow all those steps to make sure that if you need to have a certain type of vent hood or a certain type of it's like sanitizing sink system or cold storage or some other thing that's a part of the safety, the integrity of your product, that would be part of that process. There's also the second part of your question around insurance. Any business that you run, so whether you're doing it out of a home business or a commercial kitchen, any business that you run that's food, you'll need to have insurance, both for like general liability as well as for things that are specific to, many times in cases, more specific to a food business, which is different than if you're making a product versus having employees, let's say, and you're managing people in a team, and there's other insurance type things when you have people in the building other than yourself. But you definitely want to get a business license. You definitely want to get insurance. You definitely want to also check to make sure that your space might be workable and doable, but it also might not be ideal from a safety or from a, do you want to live in your space while you also run the business out of the space? Nona asks, next question, do I need any special equipment for the cooking class? So Nona, generally our classes don't need anything too special. There was a question earlier in this office hours about a high-speed blender. Many of our students who are in our plant-based style courses do benefit from having a high-speed blender. Other than that, I would say generally no special equipment is needed. Many of our students will remark that they need more storage space. They need more things to kind of account for all the volume of food that they're cooking. But generally, most of what you prepare is with a knife, a cutting board, a pot, a pan, some pretty basic things that you don't need a specialty or a commercial kitchen to operate. Next question here. What wine can I substitute for Madeira or Marsala in the garlicky mushroom task? I thought about using beef broth, but I'm trying to avoid animal products, and I'm not sure vegetable broth will be as good. So, Elizabeth, I would say vegetable broth would be fine. It'd be better than water from a flavor perspective. But I would say, for the richness of the Madeira or the Marsala, something just a little bit more body, a little bit more flavor might be more suitable. So I might go with something like a mushroom broth. So like a broth that's primarily made from mushroom stems, some shiitake mushroom, just that kind of earthier to support the overall flavor. And then to mimic the sweetness that you would find in a Marsala or like a Madeira wine, a small amount of apple cider, even a small amount of apple cider vinegar to add some of that acidity that you would also get from a wine versus just a stock or a broth. So hopefully that helps. I would say if you have nothing else, though, a vegetable stock at least would add some flavor where water wouldn't add anything. Next question from Yvonne. It's a question about oil. Is it okay to use normal vegetable oil for pan frying? Avocado oil or grapeseed oil are a bit expensive in my area. So completely understand. I think that if you're interested in frying and you're interested in using, like a vegetable oil that's a neutral flavor, there's going to be some other options that might be more affordable than the avocado or the grapeseed oil. Those to me are going to be, for many people, the best oil options. If you don't have those options, if they're not, if the like the economics don't work out for you, consider a peanut oil that should be fairly low cost. That is off the books for some people because of allergies potentially, but typically peanut oil is not too expensive. If it's something that you can do, without frying, there are oven methods that might use minimal amounts of oil to achieve those same cooking results. But if you're, committed to using the oil for frying, just a matter of finding the highest quality neutral oil that you can find. Laura's asking, is placing the vegetables in an ice bath after steaming or blanching them always necessary? I don't feel comfortable with that practice. Are there any vegetables and or moist heat methods when you don't need the ice bath? Well, Laura, good news is you don't need the ice bath. Ice bath is really designed to stop the cooking process in an effort to limit the risk of having soggy, overcooked vegetables. So one thing you could do, and this is kind of the way I cook, is because setting up a water bath just means another bowl of water, means ice, more space. What I'll do is I'll just typically undercook my vegetables in terms of time, but know that when I pull them out, I'm going to put them onto, not just into a colander or a bowl, but I'm going to put them onto a sheet pan or something where they're going to continue to cook, but they're also going to cool. So instead of shocking them and stopping the cooking process, I'm essentially not prolonging the cooking process. I'm just kind of tapering it off by taking them out and letting them just naturally cool on a rack or on a sheet pan or in a shallow bowl versus all stacked up on top of each other and coming back 20 minutes later and finding that the stuff on the bottom, might be overcooked and the stuff on the top, maybe not as much. So, if you're not comfortable with the ice bath, I would just say, blanch your vegetables, don't shock them, but still keep them from maintaining and holding that heat for too long because you don't want them to get too soft. Larry asks, is there a brand of tofu and vegetarian cheese you prefer for taste or texture? I don't really eat a lot of vegetarian cheeses. I'll usually make like plant-based cheese, like a thick cashew cream for a dip or a spread, or even to drizzle like on a flatbread for kind of a pizza effect. I do like the Kite Hill cream cheese. Growing up eating bagels and cream cheese, I do find that that's a great version of cream cheese that's also got a nice texture, a nice kind of mouthfeel to it. When it comes to tofu, the tofu I eat most of the time, I live in Portland, Oregon, and I happen to be pretty close to a very, very old, multi-generation, family-owned tofu business called Ota Tofu. So I've just gotten in the habit, or 8 times out of 10 when I'm eating tofu, it's coming from Ota, and I can buy that at some of my local supermarkets, or I even live fairly close to the facility where it's made, and will ride my bike or just do a quick drive over and pick it up, which is fabulous products. So they have any variety of silken style different tofus, so very, very soft tofu. They also have a pretty amazing extra firm tofu that I use for like tofu cutlets or stir fries. Baked tofu really holds the shape really, really well. And also for people who like kind of old style soy milk, they make a very, very flavorful, unsweetened, very soybeany flavored soy milk for people who like to use that to make desserts or to drink or those sorts of things. I find it refreshing sometimes. So that's my answer about tofu. I usually just go and get the Ota. I'm not as familiar with some of the larger commercial brands. Susan says, my husband is allergic to vitamin C. He also can't tolerate tomatoes, mushrooms, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, making cooking for him a real challenge on the whole food plant-based diet. Any suggestions? Gosh, Susan, it sounds like a challenge given, his sensitivities and allergies. I would suggest first and foremost that you seek the advice of a health professional and really understand what it is he can't tolerate and what he can tolerate, and kind of make a list of the foods. And it sometimes even helps to delineate by raw or cooked or even level of tolerance. So in other words, if there was some very, very small amount of something, would that be an issue versus it being the dish? And I think about like sometimes tomatoes are used as an ingredient in something, but it's not tomato-y. So tomatoes are sometimes used in vegetable stock, right? To add a little bit of acidity or a little bit of color. People don't think about vegetable stock having tomato in it, but it might. So questions like that to really understand what he should and shouldn't do would be very, very important. I would say once you have a good handle really on those foods that are a thumbs up, foods that are like a go, that you don't have to worry about or that have very, very low risk, then we know what we can work with. Then we know what the kind of the universe or the palette of ingredients and products we have at our disposal. And for many people, it's really a matter of recalibrating their senses, finding some new foods that they might have not really enjoyed before, but finding new ways to enjoy those foods, either through new recipes or new new ways of like appreciating those foods with different flavors. Maybe could be hot versus cold, could be less cooked or more cooked. There's all kinds of things that give people different ideas about their food. So I would start with those things, and then when you have that list of the thumbs up, we can do this foods, then we have a lot more to work with for sure. Next question. Hi, Ken. Can you please share some recipe books, recipe websites, Italian cuisine cookbooks websites? There's an overwhelming quantity of recipes everywhere. It's so hard to choose one. Gosh, I haven't actually gone out and purchased an Italian cookbook in a really long time. I have a bunch of classic Italian cookbooks that I just kind of go to for inspiration. Marcella Hazan and some of these kind of old tomes that I've had on my shelf since the 80s. But I don't really have any great suggestions, unfortunately, for new Italian cookbooks. So I'm not sure if anyone in the group has any suggestions. If you want to type in the moderation queue any ideas or websites or books, but I don't have any strong suggestions. For me, I always kind of go back to those classics. Love making fresh sauces when I have vegetables coming out of my garden. Even looking at sauces that are not tomato based, using beans and using other vegetables to kind of form the main basis of that sauce. But yeah, great. I mean, amazing region of the world, and certainly a lot of new things happening in that space. But I always kind of stick with classics. Next question here. I've always been told to cook spices for curries, both whole and ground paste, in oil until the oil separates from the paste. Otherwise, it could cause stomach upset. Is this true? Trying to cook without oil and how to go about doing this. So, there's no need to cook spices in oil in order to have them either become fragrant or to diminish any possibility of upset stomach. I think certainly if the spices were completely raw and just maybe added it on top or something, that some of the spices might not be acetylene on someone's stomach. But in the context of cooking the spices, even just simmering the spices without that initial kind of hotter first step with the frying step, no issues at all in terms of spices. Yeah, I think back to a live event that we hosted many years ago now. I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, about this subject. It was really about the topic of using spices. Our guest was Raghavan Iyer, a dear friend of mine, author of many cookbooks, just an amazing educator, inspiration, who shared a lot about the different use of spices and kind of went through and talked about whole spices versus ground spices and different ways of cooking them or toasting them versus adding them directly into simmered ingredients and things like this. So really, really great live event to revisit if you have a chance. Next question here is about curry leaves, a little bit of a follow-up from the cooking curries in terms of the spice. Curry leaves, of course, are not part of curry powder or curry spice. They do make their way into curries, oftentimes in southern Indian cuisine, for sure. But this question is about curry leaves, and do they need to be fresh? The answer is no. I have only rarely had the opportunity to use fresh curry leaves. When I lived in the Chicago area, I had access to Indian markets where I could get curry leaves, and then I would oftentimes put them on a rack and dry them myself. But many times I would just buy bags of already dried curry leaves. So when I use dry, I usually use a little bit more. It's kind of the case for lots of dried herbs. You want to use a little bit more just to bump up the fragrance and the potency of that spice. But I find that curry leaves are one of those things that people get confused by. They don't know what to do with them. They buy a bag and then they come back 6 months later and they're kind of turned to dust and just looks like a bunch of stems, and you're not really sure what to do with it. So buy them, but use them, and know that even when they're in their dried state, they don't keep their pungency forever. Is it possible to start my course a little later, say in the summer? So Toro, absolutely. If you need to change your timing a bit, if you want to reach out to our customer service team, one of those amazing people on that team would be happy to help walk you through those steps. We realize things come up, life happens, in particular during an ongoing pandemic. So hopefully we can help you and put you at ease with whatever your timing requires. Next question here. I find that seitan has a rubbery texture on the palate. Are there techniques in preparation that will change this to a texture that resembles meat, fish, or poultry? If done well, and seitan takes some practice, if done well, it will have a meaty texture. It's not going to be quite like meat because it doesn't have, the fat and the structures and all those things that proper animal product might have, but it will have that chewiness, that texture that I think that you're referring to. In terms of fish or poultry, I think that seitan is usually used as kind of a red meat type replacement. So sausages, sliced quote beef, pork, ground pork, these sorts of things. I haven't seen it used very successfully in any sort of a fish application, which would be a lot more delicate, flaky texture compared to kind of the chewiness and the denseness that you would see in other types of animal protein. The one thing I have found working with seitan over the last 15 plus years is the hydration of it, the moisture that it has and swells to before you're cooking it has a lot of impact on the palatability of that final product. So one of the things I see sometimes is seitan that's produced where it's just a bit too dry pre-cooking. And then when you start the cooking process, it becomes too dense, too rubbery, and just doesn't have kind of the right texture to go with what you're expecting. So that's one of the things I always talk about is anything you can do to really nail the formula that you have with your liquid, and also the flavor that you need on the inside of that seitan, kind of the inside out flavor seasoning wise is going to be really, really key. All right, next question here. When making stock, I like to put in the leaves of vegetables like the cauliflower you mentioned. Is there any that would be bitter or not taste good and should be avoided? I've noticed celery can be bitter. Whenever I'm making stock, it's always about balance. For me, I add the cauliflower or cruciferous vegetables, unless they're in very, very small quantities. I'll add it towards the very end, or I add it into the soup that I'm making from the broth or from the veggie stock. So certain things, like I said, like cruciferous vegetables, can become bitter. I find that that celery for me has a bitterness, but it's one of the essential flavors of a standard vegetable broth or vegetable stock because it's the bitterness of the celery that helps balance out the aromatics of the onion and the sweetness of the carrot. So those three that kind of work together harmonize, and those actually create part of this expected flavor dynamic that you get from that kind of celery, onion, carrot mix. But certainly for you, if it's bitter, I would use less or omit it, or consider putting it in a different stage of the cooking process so it doesn't maybe get as soft for you. Next question. I am following the forks over knives diet and not using salt. Can I substitute veggie broth in all recipes provided in the professional plant-based course? Is there another substitute? So if you're doing a saute technique, yeah, certainly a veggie broth or a concentrated veggie broth is going to be the right thing to use in those cases. You can't just use broth as a replacement for oil in all recipes, obviously. But if it's something where you're trying to do the sweating or the sauteing method, that would work perfectly fine. Absolutely. Next question here. Thank you, Chef Rubin. After completing the Rubin 90-day culinary course late summer and fall 2020, I'm cooking and experimenting with sauteing sans oil with confidence. I try to make it to all the Q&As, and I'm still learning lots. Well, thank you, Carol Ann. Really glad to have you in the course after that time. And, for me, when I see the word experimenting, that's great. Like, cooking is about experimenting. Every time you cook, it's an opportunity to do it a little bit different, right? Approach it from a different perspective. It's a new vegetable. It's a new flavor you're trying to develop. So I love the idea of, going into it, knowing that you're going to have to tune and tweak and maybe not expect the same exact thing as you had last time. That to me is actually part of the fun of cooking and part of why food is just tremendously exciting. It's repetitive in a way, and you can follow a process, but every time you eat, it's going to be a little bit different. Next question. P.S. What's the silver implement on the wall behind you? So this is right above my shoulder there. Back in the day, 10 plus years ago, I was the academic director at a culinary school that also had a fashion program built into it, and as part of the same school. So we did for 1 year a food and fashion show that combined forces with my culinary students and with the fashion department. And that mask was a mask that I got to wear as part of that fashion show. So it's made out of cooking equipment, graters and a strainer and a few other things. But that's just a little fun artifact from my cooking school past. Next question here. Any food prep, preserving tips you can offer a home cook if using salt, sugar, or vinegar? How do I balance flavor and food preserving ability? Interesting question. So, Leslie, I think it really depends in part. You reference a few different things that are used to preserve, right? Salt, some kind of a sugar or sweetener, or vinegar, or some acid. Each one of those things preserves in different ways, and they preserve kind of for different reasons. So, when you're thinking about preserving, you ask yourself, like, what am I preserving and why? Certainly, you can preserve vegetables and herbs through salting them. That's one approach. If you look at some cuisines from China, for instance, salted preserved vegetables are a part of the cuisine, part of the staple, cuisine there. So I think about like Szechuan salted mustard greens as an example, being one example. But more oftentimes than not, at least in North America, we're going to preserve those things maybe in a brine, a salt brine, a 2 or a 3% solution, as if we're making a pickle. That's one way to do it. You can also do a pickling process, a preserving process with vinegar itself as the acid versus the salt brine process, which more of a lacto-fermented process. But really, it's a huge subject. I would just kind of ask, what is it you're trying to preserve? What is the outcome you're expecting? And then what is the best possible process to kind of engage with what you're doing there? I spent some time studying different types of food preservation methods when I was in Mexico, and looking at, what did people do absent refrigeration, absent cold storage. So preservation of dried beans, preservation of chilies, preservation even of fish and meats and things that are dried and smoked was all part of that kind of inquiry. Next question here. Hi, Ken. I'm making veggie stock, how important are leeks? They are not always found easily here. I would say they're not critical. They're just one of those things that I find adds another kind of dimension of flavor when I'm adding other onions or things from the allium family. So I would say if you can't find them, no problem. But if you can, leeks, especially things like leek tops that you can clean, they might get discarded if they're not used otherwise, like the big, heavy green tops. Just add another layer of great flavor. So just something else to add. It's not gonna have the same one note if you add leeks to a stock that has onion and some other things. That you're kind of building more flavor, let's say. Next question, is Rouxbe a Canadian company? Our founders are in Canada, and we do have still a handful of employees at Rouxbe in Canada, where it all started. But Rouxbe primarily now actually has people more on the US side working for it. So Canadian company, but very much US based, and the mass, the most of the people on team are coming here from the United States at this point. So, is flaxseed oil an option for cooking and salads? Really, something we don't hear a lot is flaxseed oil. I happen to like flaxseed oil. I've been using flax oil in salads and snacks and topping on even things like popcorn for a long time. It does have a very particular flavor, flax oil. When you buy high quality flax oil, typically you want to keep it refrigerated and use it in quantities. It's almost used like therapeutically. There are flax oils that do well with heat, but the ones that I most accompany, used to using, goes on a salad. It's a different flavor, a different kind of oil than a more high heat oil, let's say. What I do like for high heat more and more is actually rice bran oil, which is more and more available, not super expensive, pretty neutral flavor, but handles heat really, really well. Next question here. I just started the course and I have limited kitchen skills. So far, I still have all my fingers. That is a good thing. I'm setting up my kitchen and wondering whether oat milk is considered good for whole food plant-based and how to tell which one is better. So anytime you're buying a store-bought plant-based milk product, oat milk, soy milk, almond milk, it's important to read the label. So in most cases, store-bought products are going to be more than just oats and water, right? There's going to be lecithin, carrageenan, other things that might help create a silkiness or creaminess, sometimes guar gum. So just read the label and always know that whatever it is you're seeing, like an oat milk or an almond milk, you can always make that at home in a high-speed blender and by straining out those solids. So, I use combination of homemade nut and seed milks as well as store-bought for convenience. And, I think it's good to experiment and try and see what you like. Get used to reading labels. And if you're not sure of what an ingredient is, just good to look it up. Go check it out and see if it's like a whole food, or see if it's a chemical derivative of something. Just kind of, learn about how it's made, let's say. Nona says Olive Tomato is a good website. I'm assuming that's about the Italian food. So thank you, Nona M. Appreciate that. Susan says, can you spell the tofu place in PDX? That's called OTA, O-T-A. And that's just off of 12th on the southeast Portland on the inner east side. So OTA Tofu. Next question here. How can I get the right amount of water for short grain brown rice when pressure cooking? I like to pressure cook because I've learned it's very good at making it more digestible for people with digestive issues. Question here from Scott. I would say with your short grain brown rice, I would start with a 2-to-1 ratio, or even slightly less than 2-to-1. I know people like round numbers, but if you were to do, and I say 2-to-1 in a pressure cooker because you're having to fill that pressure cooker with a fairly large volume of steam, which is going to occupy the space but not actually be penetrating into the food. So I'll go a little bit higher than I normally would if I'm doing stovetop in a pressure cooker, just because of that process. With brown rice, I should say. So about 1.7 or 2-to-1 liquid to rice, cooking for about 20 minutes or 22 minutes. In a pressure cooker, of course, you want to go down to about 7 minutes or 9 minutes. Depends on your pressure cooker, how many atmospheres you're cooking on. But I tend to do about 7 or 9 minutes with rice, and then let it sit. And it's in that sitting process under pressure that it finishes cooking and it finishes absorbing. But I typically do rice stovetop, not pressure cooker. I typically reserve pressure cooking for beans and things that I'm just trying to accelerate that cooking process. Looks like all the questions we have for today. Some really awesome questions. Just wanted to thank all of you for joining us. If there's a question that we didn't get to today, or another question that you had that might have been more individual or more personal, please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly through our support channels. We're always happy to help. And until next time, we look forward to seeing you, and happy cooking. Take care.